Great. I'm Philip Peterson, Senior Transportation Planner with the Department of Public Works. Thank you all for being here. I'm just going to kick us off. We got our consultants VHB and our partners with the CCRPC. We got GMTs also here as well, and members of the commission. So this is where the work kind of continues. I kind of was thinking about this earlier. A couple people asked me, like, what are the goals of this meeting? And I feel like this is a continuation of a lengthy conversation that's going to continue. We have several plans that we're updating, several initiatives that are going to be coming forward. We're hoping to update the overall transportation plan starting next spring as well. And this is all connected. Everything's interconnected. I had some really good conversations with folks about mass transit, microtransit, other things, and what are the goals of our city? You know, what are the different scenarios that Burlington's, what is it going to look like, and how do we get there? And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our awesome consultants with VHB to give their presentation on planBTV Walk Bike Action Plan. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Philip. Hi, everyone. All right. So appreciate all the comments. Certainly we're going to hold some space after the formal presentation here for you all to add more comments to the boards, chat with anyone here from the city, from the RPC, myself and my colleague Elizabeth in the back there who's typing away rapidly. I also see my colleague Joe here. He had a hand in a lot of the safety data analysis that you're going to see later on in the program here. So really appreciate your attention just for a few minutes here to walk through sort of what this is all about and what this plan update is about, and start to talk a little bit about the safety data and what our findings are in regards to walking and biking and safety in the city over the last 10 years or so. So just quickly on the agenda, we'll give an overview of both the previous plan that was developed and adopted in 2017, some of the progress to date, which I think a lot of you have a pulse on sort of where we're at in terms of making headway on that plan, a little bit about our plan update and how we're going about that, and then dig into some of the safety data, start to illuminate what's happening from a safety standpoint. And then open it up to a little bit of Q&A before we get back to the open house. I've already introduced many of the folks here. I know Julia's been handling things online for us, much appreciated. Eleni Churchill is here and Ileana Fox is in the back there. And on the CCRPC side, not with us tonight, but Sai Sarapalli is our PM for this from the RPC. All right, so the big message here, we're not starting from scratch. There is a plan in place. There is progress being made on that plan as we speak. There are demonstration projects out on the ground. There are new curb lines going in across the city. So, there is already a comprehensive plan for active transportation for the city. It was adopted back in 2017. It really defined about 200 potential projects across the city from the sort of infrastructure side of things. There were also a lot of policies and programmatic goals that were defined within that plan. And it was a very ambitious plan. The goal was really to implement over a 15-year time period. We've learned a lot through the last few years of the slow sort of progress to implementing that across the city. So we're going to talk a little bit about that progress and sort of why we paused and wanted to think about updating that plan at this juncture. And I'll just highlight at the bottom here, there were two primary goals that were defined for that plan, to create safer streets for everyone and to make walking and biking a viable and enjoyable way to get around town. Those goals are not going away. We're adapting them to sort of the current situation and the current context. So just keep those in mind as we sort of tick through the progress that we've made here. So we have made a lot of progress. There were priority intersections that were defined in that plan and a few added as we've made progress. A number of those projects have been completed. There are a lot of those projects that have interim improvements, sort of those like smaller scale projects that could be implemented towards the sort of vision for those locations across the city in sort of a longer term way. And then there are plans in place for the remaining priority intersections that were defined in that original plan. There have been a number of bikeway projects. We've already had some conversations tonight about, you know, in a lot of cases that's paint on the road as opposed to separated infrastructure. Again, trying to, you know, move in that sort of interim way towards the longer vision for the walking and biking rolling system within the city. And then sidewalk projects, certainly progress has been made in terms of reconstructing our sidewalks. You know, we're averaging 3 to 4 miles of reconstructed sidewalk throughout the city every year, and are making, again, those incremental changes towards, you know, really having a full sidewalk network throughout the city along our streets. A couple of other things to highlight. Some of the things that came out of the plan, certainly new news on the slow zone in downtown was one piece that was highlighted in the plan originally back in 2017. Implementing a robust bike share program. Obviously, we see the bike share bikes all over town. Expanding the use of pilot and demonstration projects. We've seen those on the ground and in place across the city, even currently in my own neighborhood. Passing and enforcing bicycle and walk-friendly laws and ordinances, certainly leaning on partners at Local Motion and others who are really pushing the envelope on this at the state level, and then making sure that sort of that programming and education happens sort of at the local level. So making progress there. Expanding bike parking, making sure that's part of our development plan across the city. So we are sort of ticking through a lot of what was defined in that 2017 plan. In terms of creating safer streets for everyone, I don't know if any of you have checked this out, but the city does have a portal where you can sort of look at the crash data and learn a little bit more about you know, the reported crashes across the city when it comes to walking and biking. You can sort of play with the toggles in the tool and check it out, and great way for them to be monitoring our progress as we move towards trying to eliminate you know, serious crashes for walking and biking across the city. And then this one I want to highlight really quickly. We did have some lofty mode share goals that were defined within the 2017 plan. Or maybe not where we wanted to be at this many years into that plan and the implementation. But you know, there's a lot to unravel here, so I just want to put it out there that, you know, certainly our work from home has shifted within the city in a significant way. But some of those, you know, single occupancy vehicle numbers are a little eye-opening. So, you know, we're making progress. We're making progress on the infrastructure side, on the policy side, on the programmatic side, but there's still work to be done in terms of really getting that mode share to where we want it to be. So why are we updating the 2017 plan? We have this comprehensive plan. It defines a whole boatload of projects across the city. It puts a lot of lofty goals in place, and you know, we've heard again and again, implementation. We want to see that plan come to fruition across the city. And so this is really an opportunity to pause, to look at what was defined for projects and strategies within that plan, and carry forward what makes sense from an evolving sort of community needs standpoint, but also really open ourselves up for some better funding eligibility for implementing that plan. So really being able to do that work of not just striping and paint on the road, but moving curbs and doing some of the infrastructure work that needs to be done to have a really robust system for walking and biking throughout the city. One of the ways that we can make ourselves eligible for more funding is taking more of a safe systems approach. So we're not leaving this plan behind, but we're really thinking about how can we carry this plan forward and also look at it in a sort of safety data-driven approach. So we'll talk a little bit about what a safe systems approach is, and then we'll dig into the data a little bit. So there is a program at the US DOT level called Safe Streets for All. Some of you may have heard of that. It is a mechanism by which a lot of communities are planning for creating demonstration projects and implementing a changing landscape for safety across our transportation system. And we highlight this particularly for walking and biking because it's really thinking about vulnerable users in sort of a new way. And so really prioritizing the most vulnerable users on our system. And this is really just to highlight some of the most sort of underpinnings of a safe systems approach to our transportation system. I think the thing that I think about most when we think about this is really creating a culture of safety around transportation. So anyone who has walked or biked anywhere in the city or anywhere else for that matter understands what it is to be a vulnerable user on our system and to feel like you've been either prioritized or not prioritized. And so I think the safe systems approach really makes safety a shared responsibility and you know, creates that foundation for you know, an improved system that really prioritizes most vulnerable users. So how are we going about this update? Like I said, we have a plan. It was adopted in 2017. We've gauged the progress that we've made there and plan to carry forward the projects and recommendations from that plan that make sense to at this juncture. And the layers that we're sort of layering on here, some of what we're hoping to get out of you all this evening, and if you've had a chance to go online and take our survey, but then really digging in on the data that's available to us. So reported serious crashes, which includes fatalities and serious injuries, incapacitating injuries on the system for walking and biking. Looking at the minor crashes on the system, so any crash that has involved someone walking or biking, that's sort of the reported crashes, but then understanding that there's a lot of blind spots and a lot of gaps in our understanding just based on that safety data. So really tonight and the survey that we've created is to understand better that near miss data, that you know, experience that you have trying to cross a street in your neighborhood, really trying to dig in and understand where are those places where that near-miss activity, that close call is happening that we don't see in the data. So really trying to understand what are the countermeasures that we can contemplate and either you know, create new projects that are going to be added to the plan or potentially enhance projects that were defined previously to be part of an updated plan. So really thinking about putting the carry forward projects from the 2017 plan, looking at the reported crash data and the safety data and our understanding of walking and biking and the safety outcomes for those modes within the city. And then really looking at all of the information we're collecting from folks across the community and putting those together to really define an updated set of projects and strategies for walking and biking. And there's a few more layers to this. So one of the things that we've heard consistently is the implementation and sort of the slow march towards the previous plan's intended outcomes. And so a few of the layers you see here help to really set us up both to make us eligible for some of those funding mechanisms to really do the bigger infrastructure work that needs to be done to have a separated, safe system across our transportation system for walking and biking, but also meets the sort of spirit and criteria that's required of some of those funding mechanisms. And so what you're seeing here is basically how we're taking our projects and strategies that are defined both through those carry-forward projects, the safety data outcomes, the potential countermeasures that will address those safety issues, and the near misses and other places that feel unsafe on the system, the countermeasures that might address those. And we really want to understand better how to prioritize those and really create a blueprint for how to implement this. Understanding that, the original plan really envisioned implementing all of the projects that were in that plan over a 15-year period, and understanding that was pretty ambitious at the time. Really want to be strategic about how we are going about implementing, what partnerships are necessary, how much is it going to cost, what are the funding mechanisms that might be eligible for that particular project. So looking across the city at the activity centers and places that draw folks that are walking and biking, prioritizing those neighborhoods and some of those more captive folks that might be walking and biking, making sure that we're doing the infrastructure work in those places that have the sort of most critical need for walking and biking infrastructure, and really being strategic about how we're prioritizing those projects in the near term, medium term, and longer term. All of that layered into sort of a prioritized action plan, and certainly a prioritized action plan, again, that meets the spirit of some of the funding mechanisms that are available for some of this work going forward. So like I highlighted on maybe the first couple of slides there were some goals that were defined in the previous plan. We are carrying those forward. You will see that we've updated some of the details in those goals. One of the components of a safe systems approach is really envisioning sort of an elimination of serious injuries and fatalities, particularly in this case for walking and biking across our transportation system, but certainly envisioning a future where we're eliminating serious injuries and fatalities across the transportation system in general. And so we are highlighting here a updated goal and target year for that, again, to sort of meet the spirit of a safe systems approach here. And the other goal that was defined in the previous plan is making walking, rolling, biking a viable and enjoyable way to get around town. This gets a little more at that mode share, and certainly, this takes more than just, separated bike and walking infrastructure across the city. It takes a culture of walking and biking and connections to the places people need to get to across the city. So, like I said earlier, looking at the mode share data, there's certainly work to do on this front, and I know a lot of you are involved in sort of building that culture across the city. Is it a quick clarifying question, or could we possibly hold it to the question session? Okay. Really quickly, just to repeat the question, it seems that this version of the goals may have eliminated a reference to mass transit, and we'll certainly look into that. It may have just been a translation error, so we will double check that language. I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, so digging a little bit into the data here and just what we've been seeing in terms of layering on that sort of safety component to this work. Thinking about the last 5 years and looking at the serious crashes across all of our transportation system for For the last 5 years, serious injury totals are there at 40 and 1 fatality. What you see in the breakdown here is the peds are green and the bikes are blue, so that gives you a sense of what the numbers are in terms of pedestrian and bicyclist involved crashes that resulted in a serious injury. And then in the last 10 years, we did a look back over the last decade to understand what the numbers were over the last 10 years, again, looking at the totals there. I think the key takeaway in looking at all of the safety data for the last 10 years is that we were seeing a trend of the most serious crashes on our system actually happening at 25 miles an hour or less. It is very rare that crashes that result in serious injury or fatality are happening at a higher rate of speed, which was just a surprising anecdote from the analysis, and that the majority of crashes that involved a bike or a ped were happening at really low rates of speed, around 10 miles per hour.
Yeah, excuse me. There's people hot riding around on Church Street because my window is open facing Church Street, and there's a lot of hot riding and people, college kids and stuff like that. What about the safety of these young ones that when you're supposed to just ride the road safely?
Yeah, and so I'm going to repeat really quickly, just a paraphrased what I heard, just so folks can hear it online. But we're hearing a comment from the audience about hot rodding on Church Street, and hearing that, especially at night with open windows. And what are we supposed to do about ensuring the safety of folks that are out on the street that that activity is happening?
I walk the streets. I used to walk the streets, and I've seen all this stuff.
I think that's a great comment, but folks, let's just hold off on any comments and questions until we finish the presentation. Once the presentation is complete, then we can take questions and comments. Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
All right, so digging a little deeper into the data, I just want to highlight a few things here for pedestrians. We did see 1 fatality over the last 10 years involving a pedestrian up on North Avenue, and 26 serious injuries over the last 10 years. Just a little, digging a little bit deeper into the data here. Failure to yield was evenly split between drivers and pedestrians in those 26 serious injury crashes. We dug into, the detail on the narrative in the crash data. And drivers typically fail to yield when they're turning from a major road. So, they're looking at a lot of things when they're doing that maneuver, and maybe having a lack of visibility is often what was looked at there. Pedestrians typically fail to yield when crossing mid-block outside of an established crossing. Occasionally this was happening when folks were maybe leaving a parked car on one side and running across to a destination or something else on the other side. So we're seeing informal mid-block crossings being sort of the most prevalent way in which serious injuries were happening involving pedestrians. And then at signalized intersections, more formal mid-block crossings, and then unsignalized intersections, sort of in that order across those serious injuries that were occurring. In the last 5 years, there have been 13 serious injuries, so we are seeing sort of a consistent number from a decade and then within the last 5 years. And with minor crashes, we really dug into this data, and we're trying to understand if the trends were different or validated what we were seeing with the serious crashes. We do see a slightly different message here. So there were 57 minor crashes over the last 5 years. In that case, almost 80% the drivers failed to yield in those minor crashes. So a little bit of a different story than with the serious crashes involving pedestrians. Most of those are happening at intersections, sort of split between signalized and unsignalized intersections across the city. And then some of those are happening at more informal mid-block crossings and driveways. Digging into the bike data a little bit here, there haven't been any fatalities reported over the last decade when it comes to crashes involving bicyclists, but there have been 11 serious injuries over that period, mostly happening at intersections, predominantly signalized intersections. There have been some segment crashes, and then in the serious injuries, it was more of a 60, 30, 40 split of bicyclists failed to yield to drivers failed to yield. There were 3 serious injuries in a 5-year period, so we are actually, it's a very small sample set, very small data set, but we are seeing some progress, so we're going from 11 injuries over the last 10 years to just 3 in the last 5. Yeah, there have been a number of crashes just over the border in South Burlington, so certainly it's something to be thinking about, especially in the connections to our system here within the city limits. These are actually looking at crash narratives. So we looked at everything up to January of 2024. So it's through the calendar year 2023.
So folks, the folks online can't hear your questions out in the audience. But like I said, let's just wait on any questions until after the presentation. Thanks.
And finally, digging in on the bicyclist minor crashes over the last 5 years. Again, a similar story here. Drivers failed to yield 57% of the time. Most of those, again, were occurring at intersections, 41% at signalized, 26% at unsignalized. And then driveways and segment crashes came in 3rd and 4th there. So stepping back and sort of looking at, again, small sample of data, a good problem to have, in my opinion, when we look at the grand scheme of things, right? If we're really aiming for an elimination of serious injuries and fatalities on our system involving bikes and peds, I think we're making some progress, but, there's work to be done. And so, really stepping back from that small sample set of data and looking at some of the focal areas that really jump off the page. Certainly looking at some of these narratives, the visibility and inattention issues on the driver's side of the coin is something we need to be paying attention to. Thinking about this in a safe systems approach, there's programming, there's technologies, there's some other ways to get at this. That we really need to be thinking about as part of a comprehensive walking and biking plan that really considers a safe systems approach. Informal mid-block crossings are our biggest challenge from the pedestrian side of the coin. It's really unexpected to have a pedestrian cross somewhere where maybe there's not a marked crossing. Understanding that there are destinations, there are long lengths in some parts of the city between formal crossings, so recognizing that and thinking about how we tackle that and create some countermeasures to address that. From the bike side of things, there are, looking at the narratives, a lot of improper advancement through intersections. Again, unexpected behaviors on the cyclist's behalf that are resulting in some of these more serious crashes. Again, it's sort of an all approaches approach to this. I think there's education, there's reinforcing, the rules of the road and how they apply to cyclists, but then there's also, oftentimes we're leaving cyclists out to dry at the intersection, so really thinking about how we get at the infrastructure side of things too and create those countermeasures from the infrastructure side. And then for focus corridors, we really wanted to look at where these are occurring. It turns out that there's not sort of those clustered hotspots that you might expect to see across the city. These are sort of happening a little bit everywhere. So, again, small numbers that we're working with, but trying to identify those focus corridors or those places where we can make the most impact. So on the map on the right, you see highlighted corridors where there have been 6 or more serious crashes, and then the green color is indicating 5 or less serious crashes, and then some intersections where 5 or more bike peg crashes have happened are highlighted there. So again, looking at where this is occurring and how that overlays with what projects were identified in the previous plan, but then thinking through what are some updated countermeasures or infrastructure solutions that we might bring to the table to address these across these focus corridors. For the focus corridors, there's certainly an emphasis on arterial streets. You can sort of see what jumps off the page there is sort of some of our major corridors through the city. At signalized intersections, certainly a place where we could make some progress, and then within the downtown core. Just really quickly highlighting a few of the activities we've been up to. Certainly want to talk to everyone through this process and this update, but Philip has been on the Neighborhood Planning Assembly tour. He has been to every NPA across the city.
I missed one. Andrea, Todd's like, you didn't make it to mine, and I didn't.
No. Okay, not every, almost every NPA across the city. We have been doing some targeted outreach to pull other folks into this conversation and bring other folks to the table. And then some of you may have already jumped on and looked at the survey input tool and helped us to understand where are those pain points, where are those near misses, where do you have those close calls on the system. We're really blind to that. We don't have a data set that tells us that, so we're looking to everyone within the community to contribute to that so we have a better understanding. That's really going to fill some gaps for us.
Since they opened up the Champlain Parkway.
Let me give you the microphone so that people online can hear you.
Okay. Since they opened up the Champlain Parkway, that there's more cars and motorcycles skating around on Church Street. It's open. It's not basically secure yet as far as red lights and stuff like that. We need more of a system where, since they opened Champlain Parkway, and not only that, but I live in a senior complex, and there's cars and motorcycles going around Church Street. And when you got a senior complex right in the middle of nowhere, it's not safe.
Thank you. I'll just add, as I'm coming around with the microphone here, part of sharing is sharing time as well, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that would like to speak. I don't think it's going to reach you over there, sir. You can come to me, please. Here you go.
Thanks, Philip. Great. Thanks for this session and the format and everything. I appreciate it. My name's Jack Hansen. I live downtown on College Street. I served on the Burlington City Council from 2019 to 2022 and was on the Transportation, Energy, and Utilities Committee for that whole time and was chair of it, I think, for 2 years. So I've been super involved in these conversations over the last few years, and I think as far as the presentation itself and kind of this process, I would say I appreciated seeing the mode share shift, as I think that's one of the North Star kind of goals that we really haven't made any progress on, and I think we need to take a long, hard look at why that is and how we're going to resolve that. I noticed that you pushed back the kind of goal on that to 2040, which I don't think is really, I think the approach should be, why didn't we get there and what are we going to change and how are we going to get there as quickly as possible, and pushing it back by 14 years seems like not what we can afford to do right now. And then as far as the bike network, I would have liked to have seen a similar analysis of, okay, this is the bike network that was envisioned in 2017, these were the dates, and here's where we are and why, and here's how we do better going forward. And for my part, I think the biggest thing that we need to do is really prioritize safety, accessibility, movement, especially for the most vulnerable users, and the climate crisis and our city's shared climate goals in these decisions, rather than what I've seen and why I think we're not hitting the 2017 plan, which is when we go street by street and have these debates, we're going off of the politics of who shows up and, you know, people coming in and saying, I don't want to lose parking or have to walk further for parking. And if 3 of those people show up, we build it, but if 15 of those people show up, we don't, is what I've seen, that sort of pattern. When in reality, safety is safety, and addressing the climate crisis is addressing the climate crisis, and we should do that whether 8 people don't want to park further away or whether 3 people, it shouldn't matter. So I think just getting to a place where we're prioritizing those things and actually moving forward. Thank you.
Okay. So my name's Diane Gayer, and I'm in Ward 6. I support what you all said. I will say it in different words. What I heard from this program is that there's a build-out of more sidewalk network facilities that, to me, gets at paving, separating bike, walk, road, transit, and so forth into multiple layers. And when you start to pave more, you get into a lot of stormwater issues, and stormwater is probably as serious an issue for the city as another crosswalk. The flooding will come faster than some of those other safety concerns that we all care about. But we can't ignore the role of stormwater in all of this network. It's critical. And part of that is this sort of missing on the pie charts of the road share plan. That slide showed the bus transit connection going from, I don't know what it was on the smaller ones, to the big one, which is current, to like 4.7. So losing that whole notion of transit in this mix means that you're missing out the connectivity of the bus in the bike system, the walker in the bus system. And if you start to lose the transit, you've lost the future of the city. It's not, we do all of it, and we need to diminish the cars. That will make things safer. And so ignoring transit in this story is huge. And by that I mean the buses.
Yeah, well, a lot of people use the buses to take the buses to the food shelf. And
Yes.
the seniors, where I live in Cathedral Square, if we lose the buses, there's not going to be too many people that have vehicles. Yeah, I mean, that don't have cars.
And I'm not talking about missing the buses, I'm talking about having them included in the planning so that it's an integrated system. Okay. And then the last way I was going to introduce some of this was we used to map desire lines. And I know personally I'm one of those mid-block crossers. I cross Shelburne Road where I need to cross Shelburne Road because the intersections are a mile apart. And South Park, for all of us, is a desire line. Not just, and the school kids are further, and they do have a crosswalk, but that one's too short. You will miss the bus trying to get across at that crossing. So anyway, sorry. So mapping the desire lines would get to perhaps pinpointing some of the mid-block crossings. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. We're going to go to someone online. Someone has their hand up. Julia, if you could facilitate that, and then I'll come over here to Andrea.
Linda, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, thank you. I know that as of July 1st, drivers were required to give 4 feet of clearance for bicyclists. But I haven't seen how that is advertised for the folks that drive cars. How is that communication put out there in our city that we're really concerned about that, as well as for vulnerable users?
It's a good question. It's definitely on a list of to-dos. You know, one of the things that we worry about in the city is sign proliferation. Can you say that? And sometimes too much signage is a problem, but it is an issue that we're working through. But did you have any other comments, ma'am?
No,
Okay.
that's all I wanted to say. The only other thing I was going to say is that I lead lots of bike trips for AARP seniors, and they're very concerned about not having enough protected bike lanes throughout the town. So just a plug as far as when you're considering bike paths and bike lanes, that's something that is of concern to seniors. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a couple questions and some comments, so I'll be quick as I can. I'm Andrea Todd. I live in Ward 3. And with the data that you were presenting about safety and the increase in numbers of accidents, I noticed that the word drivers was listed. I'm wondering if that included buses in terms of conflict drivers and that were driving a bus versus driving a car. That was one question, like lumping drivers all together. Are they talking about, who are we talking about? And the other is, of that data, is there matching data to show us how many more cars are driving on the road? Because I really feel like since we last did this plan, the population has increased in Burlington, the number of drivers has increased in Burlington, and so what can sort of concerns me about tonight's meeting is that there's this focus on safety, but again, to echo earlier comments, there's an absence of mass transportation with this picture, that we're looking at the same problem in the same way instead of saying, where is the solution to safer roads with less cars on them? So could there be a matching data to show how many more drivers are on the road to correlate with those increase in accidents? Because I think if we're looking at hot spots on the road, I think we're looking at mass infrastructure, and the mass infrastructure needs to include the mass public transportation lines too. And I feel like there's institutional knowledge that's missing from this presentation. And so I see people in the room who I saw at some of those early meetings, but I see a lot of people that weren't as part of that process. And so institutional knowledge-wise, it's like that graph with those buses and the multi-modes has been written out of this current piece of the puzzle. And I would like those mass modes, multi-modes, alternative modes to be highlighted in this future plan as we're updating it rather than diminished. It feels diminished in this current goal setting and plan process. So I want this to be a planBTV walk bike, not just safety plan, but like walk bike infrastructure plan.
Great, thanks. Hang on.
Run down the road and stuff like that, and when the seniors are walking, and we have only one stoplight, but when you got the other, what I said, Champlain Parkway, we need lot more stoplights, because it's going to connect up to Cherry Street, where we live.
Breck Bowden, I live on Brooks Avenue. I just want to pick up on this theme of infrastructure. Early in your presentation, you talked about the safe systems, and one big component of that was shared responsibility. I think if you drill down to the next line, that's about behavior change. And I think we all know that behavior change comes very, very slowly, and so maybe that's why you have to push that out to 2040. But I agree with Jack, we need faster responses than that. And I worry about, this is a destination for a lot of tourists. How are we going to change their behaviors as well? I think we need to enforce things by creating infrastructure that separates the traffic from the pedestrians and the bicyclists. By doing that, you will automatically and instantly change behavior. So I just want to advocate for increasing or changing our infrastructure. If our objective is always to get the most number of cars as fast as possible to the destination, we're going to continue to have these crashes. Let's slow down the speeds and the numbers of vehicles.
Well, how are you going to speed down how are you going to speed down the
Okay, we'll go back to online.
speed limit when you don't have enough police officers?
Evan, we see your hand up.
Evan?
Hey, can you hear me?
We can hear you in the room.
Cool. So I think a couple of pieces of feedback. I'll echo Jack's sentiment. I feel like pushing it back to 2040, and maybe there's some other reasoning for it, just feels like wrong. I moved here when I was 18 for college. I'm 34 now, and I will be 50 by the time we reach that goal, which is scary. My kid will almost have graduated high school. I think we need to work on a shorter time scale, and I understand that sometimes like setting a goal that's too ambitious, you don't reach it, but I'd rather set an ambitious goal and not reach it than be able to kick the can like almost 20 years down the road. I think that's a scary thing, especially with just everything going on, climate, safety, just having kids be safe going to school, and other things. And then I live in the South End, so one of the things, and I use the Champlain Parkway, the new multi-use path, fairly frequently, although I'm actually using the road more now because sometimes the signal priority for like at cyclists and pedestrians when you have to cross is really bad. There's examples, in Europe, in Montreal, where we set up pedestrians and bicyclist sensing equipment, which we have for the cars on the road on the Champlain Parkway. And so, like there's so many intersections that a cyclist reaches, they're stopping, they're pressing the button, trying to cross Pine Street. If people even like at the end of, I know the Rail Yard Enterprise is a big thing, but trying to cross there is like frightening if cars even decide to stop at all. And then kind of better intersections overall, and more use of parking protection and things like that. We did pilot projects with parking protection. I haven't seen a single parking protected bike lane, but I know there's lots of people. We built out North Avenue and Colchester Avenue and Chase Street was a bump out to try to help pedestrians, and every single one of those, the flexible posts get knocked down continuously, and that could be a cyclist, that could be a pedestrian. I don't know, like prioritizing buffered safety maybe more so than a broader network would be better. And then my last point is partly I want to make sure we're not falling into survivorship bias when we look at the data and says this is where all the crashes are occurring. Is it because those, and I think those places should have better infrastructure, but do they have more of the things that make a bikeable area? And maybe we should extend that, especially if our goals are mode share. Why doesn't the new North End have as much crashes? It might just be people aren't using the bike facilities, or North Avenue doesn't feel safe, so they're using the bike path instead. Maybe there's not, commerce like there is downtown and in the old North End within biking distances. Those kinds of things are also, I think, important. Thank you.
So we have about 5 minutes left in the presentation. I'm happy to talk to folks after the meeting, but take a couple more shares.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Becca Brown McKnight. I'm the city councilor for Ward 6. Thank you for being here and this presentation. I wanted to echo the concern about pushing the goal back to 2040. That just seems really out of step with our reality, and I think in my mind 2030 would almost be too far out. So I'm curious if there's a reason that was that was decided on, if that's still something that's flexible. So that's point number one. Point number two is, again, echoing concern that it feels very siloed, and this is a question that I have been asking a lot of times, and Philip, maybe I've asked you this already, but I'm curious if do we have a plan in Burlington to reduce a plan or even a goal or a roadmap to reduce the number of cars in the city? Because we can't, this is a lot of amazing data, and I'm really glad we're doing all of this, and we have made a lot of progress. But if we just ignore cars and hope that they go away, none of this will really work in the way that it is meant to. We need to proactively take steps to encourage people to stop using their cars in any way that we can. And it just feels like there's not a big picture vision or plan for that at the moment. Thanks. I'm just wondering if you have thoughts and recommendations on how we can get there, because that's something I would be happy to advocate for. Thank you.
Lots of thoughts, lots of recommendations, but I'm going to let Jeff share.
Thank you, and thanks for the presentation. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what has been said here. I just had one quick question. Like, if we are in this mode of revisiting the plan that exists, if we could take a look at, and maybe this is a future presentation, but like, I'd be curious just to learn more about why project construction has gone so much slower than what originally was thought. Like, I'm sure there are reasons, but like, are there things that have been learned, like lessons learned that can be shared? And similarly, with the projects that have been able to get constructed, are people using them, and are they happy with those parts? I think it was Evan's comment on the Pine Street pieces, just so that there's like that feedback loop of like, we did it, like, how is it, what, for the many other projects that are continuing on, what can we do to like continue improving, as opposed to just like check and on to the next one? Like, that continuing learning process would be great to incorporate. Thanks.
The reason why it's taking a lot longer is because they're putting more pipes in, changing the old pipes and putting in the new ones, because the ones that were old were about 100 years old.
The short answer is that construction is super expensive, and the cost has just shot through the roof over the past few years.
I just want to second what Becca said. I'm also interested in these hot spots and the fact that the focus is not on reducing the number of cars that create the hot spot. It feels to me, especially since this is called a walk-bike conference, that we're missing the real problem, which is the automobile, not the pedestrians or the bikes. So the focus should be on ways in which to reduce the automobile traffic, whether it's speed limits or speed bumps or the use of public transit.
There you go, Jack.
My name is Jack Tiano. I'm on the PAC for this, and this is something that I kind of brought up earlier, and is I'm hearing echoed in the room, which is that like, I understand why we're doing this plan. I understand like the technical reasons that we're doing this to focus on grant money, but I think I just want to like reiterate that I think that this is the wrong thing for the future of the city. I think we need to finish this plan. I think we need to position ourselves to be able to apply for the Safe Streets for All grants in the short term. But like, our mode share is going backwards. We're saying that the data is saying that our plan is going so slow, and we're like pushing back the plan to meet the speed that it's traveling. And I think realistically, we need to really rethink completely from the ground up how we're approaching this problem. Construction's not really gonna come back down. Like, everything's getting more expensive, it's taking longer. You know, we tried to do 2026 and we missed it, and now we're saying 2040, like, so we're gonna be at 2040, we're gonna be like, well, maybe 2075. Like, we're gonna need to redo this and really rethink about how we reshape our city to be more alternative and public transportation focused. And so I don't know, I'm hearing this in the room. I'm not mad about what's up here. I understand the technicalities of why this is happening, but I just want to make sure that no one feels that this is the long-term solution and that there are big ways that we need to, or just big changes that need to happen. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. It is after 7:30. I want to respect our partners' time in VHB and the CCRPC. I will tell you that Julie and I, my partner over at DPW, the Public Works engineer that I work with, we had a lot of meetings last week and discussed what we want to do in the future with the transportation plan. And, you know, going to the MPAs last month was very helpful for me to talk to folks in the different neighborhoods, get an idea on what people want, what people think, and we do need to look at the different scenarios. You know, what are the scenarios in Burlington, and how do we move forward? So thank you all for being here tonight. You're a major component of this project. We can't do this work without you. Continue to come to these meetings and continue to give us your input. I'm happy to talk to anybody afterwards, provide my email and phone number, and thank you.